They summoned me long after the bells of St. Novarus had fallen silent. The order's hall was colder than usual, as if even the stone walls had grown weary of prayers. Only a dozen candles lit the chamber, their flames bending away from me the moment I stepped inside. A small, trembling gesture that felt more like instinct than draft. The air reeked faintly of burnt oil, old parchment, and the scent of myrrh that clung to everything touched by ritual. At the far end, behind the altar of black oak, 3 inquisitors sat in scarlet hoods. Brass masks concealed their faces, each one molded into a different expression: sorrow, fury, and silence. They were the last surviving elders of the cleansers. Between them lay a small iron box, no larger than a Bible, sealed with black wax and marked by our sigil, a cross split by flame. The oldest inquisitor motioned for me to approach, his gloved hand shaking as though from fever. I knelt before them. He spoke only once, voice echoing behind the mask like a dying wind. "Brother Ashford," he said, though that was not my birth name. "The last of the possessed clergy has been found. Proceed with the ritual of immolation. Do not attempt exorcism." He slid the box toward me. I knew better than to open it there. Its contents were never to be seen under holy light, only in darkness, for the fire's approval was first tested in shadow. Still, I could feel the weight of the parchment within, heavier than paper should ever be, as if guilt itself had formed. I had performed dozens of burnings before. Witches that screamed scripture, monks whose tongues spoke backward prayers, even a bishop who wept molten tears. Yet that night, the air felt wrong. It carried silence too thick to breathe, a silence that pressed against my ribs as if waiting for my heart to stop. I remember glancing toward the crucifix above the altar. Its bronze Christ was blackened with soot, the mouth melted shut from centuries of smoke. They told me the priest's name was Father Lucian, once a scholar of scripture, now something else. He had served as confessor to the Archbishop of Calvarin, a man rumored to keep relics older than Christ himself. Witnesses said Lucian began hearing voices in the confessional, not of men, but of something that asked to be forgiven. He had spoken of a second gospel, one written in flame and blood. When the exorcists came, the fire refused to burn him. Instead, frost bloomed across the crucifix and the candles went out all at once. The inquisitors considered this an abomination. For centuries we had believed that fire, divine fire, was incapable of deceit. It either consumed or it spared. But the idea that it recoiled meant something new had entered our world, something that inverted the laws of heaven. The elder inquisitor's voice cracked through the mask. The flames rejected him. That means his corruption runs deeper than hell. You must bring him to ash by your own hand. And remember the rule: the fire burns only what is condemned. I nodded, though the words gnawed at me. The fire burns only what is condemned. That phrase had followed me my whole life, whispered at every trial, every pyre. But no one ever said who decided what was truly condemned, man or God. The cleansers were dying out, each of us worn down by the same burden: to burn those the church refused to acknowledge, to end the suffering of the cursed, possessed, the unwanted. Some called us executioners, others saints. Neither felt true. What we really were, I think, were penitents trying to light our own path out of darkness. When the ritual chamber was cleared, the attendants came with the tools. They placed them on a white cloth before me. An iron crucifix coated in salt, to repel lies, a vial of blessed oil thickened with ashes of martyrs, a tinderbox carved with sigils of flame, and finally a blade short curved, engraved with the phrase ignis non fallit. The fire does not lie. It was said to be forged from steel quenched in the blood of a fallen inquisitor. I never asked whose. The monk who handed me these items avoided my eyes. His voice was barely a whisper. The flames might not obey this time. I wanted to ask what he meant, but he was already gone. That night I packed my satchel by candlelight. Each object I placed inside seemed to hum faintly, a vibration only the damned could feel. Outside my window, the wind carried a distant bell's toll, faint, uneven, as though rung by a dying hand. It had been years since any bell had sounded from the valley of Calvarin. They said the marsh there could swallow sound, that even birds avoided flying over it. The church still stood, they said, though the congregation had been dead for decades. The place where Father Lucian waited. Before dawn, I descended into the crypt beneath the order's chapel. The descent was steep, the air thick with incense that failed to mask the smell of burnt flesh. Down there hung the remnants of our predecessors, masks blackened from smoke, robes that still carried the scent of judgment. I knelt among them, feeling the cold stone seep through my knees, and whispered a prayer, not for strength, not for victory, but for obedience, for the ability to carry out what I was told, even if heaven no longer listened. The shadows in the crypt moved when I prayed. I remember that clearly. They stretched toward me, slow and deliberate, as if curious, and then I felt a heat in my palms, faint, pulsing. When I lifted them, I saw the old scars on my skin glow faintly red, like embers beneath flesh, the marks of fire's favor, or perhaps its warning. I tried to steady my breathing. Somewhere above, the morning bell rang for prime, but the sound was distant, muffled, almost reluctant. I took it as my signal. If the flames refused me, refused again, there could only be one explanation. The corruption wasn't in the priest. It was in me. I stood, fastening my cloak. My reflection in the iron lantern beside me didn't match the movement I made. For a heartbeat, it lingered a moment longer, watching. So I left the order's walls behind, following the dying star that hovered above the mountains. The snow had begun to fall, thick and silent, like the ashes of saints. Behind me, the bells of St. Novaris rang once, a single, hollow note that echoed long after the sound should have died. I thought it was a blessing then, but in truth it was a farewell. The mission they called a cleansing was something else entirely. It was a confession written in flame, waiting to see whose soul would burn first. The road to Calvarin was not a road anymore, just a thread of drier earth stitched through the marsh. Frost clung to the reeds in the early light, turning each blade into a glass needle that pricked the fog. I left the monastery before dawn with a pack that felt heavier than its contents, a mule that disliked my smell, and a companion who could not speak. Brother Malchier walked a pace ahead, but down despite the cold, the sutures along his lips dark as old ink. He carried the iron chest with our relics as if it were a sleeping child. When the mire tugged at his boots, he never looked back to ask for help. He simply leaned his weight and kept going, the chain handles biting his palms until they bled through the gloves. He had accepted pain as punctuation. Past the second milestone, the world stopped acknowledging prayers. I tried the short blessing for safe passage out of habit. The words left my mouth warm and certain, and then I felt them die in the air, not opposed, only absorbed, like rain swallowed by dry dust, leaving no wet mark behind. Malchier felt it too. He tapped the cruciform brand on his wrist twice. It was a sign we used when formal vows faltered. Follow the older rules, the ones the body remembers. Step wide on the left foot. Keep metal warm. Never look into water when you hear your own name. By midday the fog had thickened into a white corridor. Sound traveled poorly. My boots made no noise even when I kicked loose stones. We passed a tree struck by lightning so many times its trunk had fused into a black spiral. Someone had nailed a rosary to the bark. Every bead had been replaced with a knotted human hair. Malchier paused, lifted the rosary, and counted the knots with his thumb. 33, not 59. He lowered it without taking it down. Wrong numbers belonged to wrong devotions. We found the first parish outbuilding just after noon, where the ground rose enough to pretend it was land. The roof had collapsed, but someone had swept the floor clear of debris and set 3 wax tapers in a triangle, their flames bright and unmoving in the windless room. On the wall, a child's scrawl looped and broke. He still prays for us, he still. The chalk line tore away, as if the hand had been pulled mid-letter. The thought that any child had come this far into the marsh tightened my throat. I imagined small boots cut by ice, a small mouth shaping Latin out of fear. Under the table lay a wooden rattle carved with saints' faces. I turned it over and found the faces sanded smooth, features erased by determined hands. Leave no eyes in the room. The path narrowed. Reeds brushed our legs with a dry whisper. When I checked the mule's eye, the iris had turned a dull mirror, reflecting nothing. I did not tell Malchier. He already knew. Animals told him truth faster than people did. He reached into his cloak and drew out a clay ampoule sealed with tallow, the size of a thumbnail. He cracked it against his teeth and let a drop of its bitterness fall onto his tongue. Bloodroot and a trace of copper. Not a sacrament, exactly, but something older that taught the body to remember fire. We made camp in a circle of alder trees that had grown into one another, laced at the crown in a dun halo, the ground beneath them dry. It was not safety, only a place the marsh had failed to claim. I warmed the iron crucifix under my cloak. If you let sacred metal go cold, it stops meaning what you think it means. I learned that as an apprentice when I tried to bless a dying woman with a frozen medallion. Her breath crystallized on it, and when she exhaled, it came out as black smoke for a single second. Sometimes I still smell her hair. Malchier ate nothing. He never does on approach. He broke the evening silence by tapping twice on the lid of the iron chest, and then 3 times on the root beside him. His sequence meant the weight changed. I crouched and lifted the chest. It had by a finger's worth. Relics breathe near strong devotions, the elders used to say, and they grow heavy where they are wanted. Wanted or needed is a matter of perspective. I took out the tinderbox and thumbed its runes. The grooves felt deeper than the day before, like fingerprints pressed from the other side. At twilight, the fog took on a color. Not red, not properly, but the memory of red inside white. A blush that came and went with the faint bell we heard then, a single, uneven peal far away. The bell of Calvern was cracked. The story swore it had been rung once to call help when the fever came, and had never rung right since. The toll drifted over the marsh like a lazy knife. The mule trembled. I rubbed the animal's neck, and the hair fell away under my glove in a clean patch. Skin underneath smooth as wax. Beneath it a scrap of charcoal words. Not a brand, but a writing pressed into flesh. Do not lead the pure to the gate. I covered the patch with my palm until the letters faded. Ink that is not ink dissolves in shared heat. We moved again at dawn. The world had settled into the color of an unlit candle. In that light, distance could lie with a straight face. I could not tell if the steeple ahead of us was a mile away, or a memory hung low on the sky. The marsh made the same sound whether you were about to put your weight on safe ground or the thin scum of a bottomless pool. We tied ropes to our waists and to each other, spacing out the slack so that if one of us fell, the other could jump sideways and make a triangle of tension. Built law. 3 points hold where 2 slip. By late morning, the fog softened its grip just enough to show us edges. The church rose out of the marsh, not like a building, but like a tooth. Yellowed stone thrust through peat. Its bell tower leaned at a righteous wrong angle. The cross on its crown had been removed. In its place stood a simple iron spike, the kind butchers used to bleed animals. The front doors hung open with the relaxed slant of a jaw after death. Each door had been carved with the same scene repeated. A man kneeling at a pyre that would not catch. The carver had given up on the flames and filled the space with empty lines, then gouged the wood as if angry at his own hands. The gate before the church was made of crucifixes, hundreds of them, stripped of their figures, nails still in the wood where wrists once had been pinned. No bone, no splinters of plaster, only the idea of bodies. I counted by habit. 9 across, 11 down, 5 layers deep. Numbers tell you what kind of faith you are walking through. 9 and 11 love each other in churches built by men who expect to hear and answer when they pray. 5 when layered is the number for desperate bargains. Malchier traced the intersection of 2 crosses with a fingertip, then flinched. The wood bled sap that smelled like myrrh. We did not touch the gate again. Inside the yard, the grass was shaved low as a monk's crown, though I saw no scythe marks, no hoof prints, no path. Wind did not move here. The fog stopped at the boundary like a dog that knows which rooms it is banned from. I felt smaller as we crossed the threshold. I always do in places where failures have gathered. The church's stones remembered palms and knees and tears, and memory is a gravity of its own. We pushed the door. It's side to side. Candles burned within in perfect stillness, laid out in rings that nested tighter and tighter until they formed a single circle at the center, like the pupil of an unblinking eye. Beeswax, pure, and yet the flames smelled faintly of tallow and winter apples, and something copper underneath. The windows were unglazed, yet no draft entered. Cold lived here without needing wind to carry it. Father Lucien knelt at the heart of those circles, chained to the altar by lengths of blackened iron more ceremonial than restraining. He was thin the way old parchment is thin, but his spine held true, his head bowed not in collapse but in posture. His hands were folded in prayer, and his fingers had fused together with years of heat, skin to skin, as if the act of praying itself had become a wound that healed closed. His lips moved without sound in a rhythm I recognized from childhood, the opening plea of the Miserere, slowed to almost nothing. Not out of reverence, out of exhaustion measured in syllables. Malchior went to one knee and set the chest down. He unwrapped the linen bundle with the ignition torch and the vial of oil. His stitched mouth twitched when the vial touched air. This oil did not want to be in the world. It crawled up the glass to get away from light. He set it beside the altar and signed twice with 2 fingers at his throat. Hurry carefully. Father Lucien stopped praying. His head turned a fraction. I had felt watched before in ruin, by bats and spiders and the memory of men who had knelt where I knelt. But this was different. This was the feeling you get when someone who loves you says your name from a room you did not know they were in. He did not open his eyes. He simply said, very softly, the name I had not heard in 20 years. My first name. The one I buried the day I took the hood. The torch in my hand died without ever having been lit. I did not drop it, though every part of my body tried to. My hand closed tighter. The metal went cold so quickly it bit my skin. I stepped closer until I could see the pulse in the priest's throat, slow and stubborn, as if each beat had to convince itself to go on. How do you know me? I asked. My voice surprised me. It sounded like a stranger's. He smiled, not cruelly, not kindly. The smile you give a child who asks where the sun goes at night, and you remember the right lie to keep them from crying. When he opened his eyes, they were blind with milk, yet the room seemed to see through them. The candles leaned away, one after the other, like wheat in a wind that moved only at his gaze. The fire knows, he said. His voice was layered, 2 tones not in harmony but in patient argument, and the fire remembers what it will not burn. Behind me, something gave with a dry snap. I turned in time to see the iron crucifix split clean in Malchior's hands, as if the metal had remembered being ore and wanted to be unmade. He did not startle. He bent and set both halves gently on the floor, palms up, a gesture of apology to a tool. The circles of candles began to breathe, in and out without flicker. Wax thickened as if it were trying to grow skins to protect the flame. A scent rose from beneath the stone. Not rot, not damp breath. The nave itself inhaled, exhaled. From below, through the cracks in the flagstones, a long, patient sound, older than the church and angrier than any sermon. It was not loud, but found the softest parts of the ear and pressed. I took the blade from my belt and showed it to the air like a magistrate proving a seal, engraving toward the room, not toward me. Do not remind a place that you, too, can be cut. Ignis non fallit, I said, for myself as much as for any listening thing. The letters glinted. The glint died. Malchior lifted the oil and looked at me. He did not have to speak. We had practiced this moment 100 times in 100 dead chapels. I nodded and began the prayer, not because I believed it would work here, but because my hands needed to be doing something while my mind failed. The words came out correctly, steady, without tremor. I could have been reciting a grocery list for all the authority they carried. Father Lucien listened with the patience of someone remembering a melody from a childhood he did not love. When I reached the line that calls heat down into obedience, he whispered the next line with me. Perfect. And then the next, and the next after that, until I ran out of prayer, and he kept going into a verse none of us had been taught. The floor under my boots warmed. The iron in my hand did not. That was when I understood. The flames had not refused him. They had been waiting for me to arrive. Not because I would light them, because I would teach them what to burn. The first spark should have been the easiest. I had lit hundreds of pyres in my life, seen sinners and saints alike vanish in columns of gold light. But here, in the Church of Calvary, even the tinder was afraid. The torch hissed weakly when I struck it. The ember glowed and died, leaving the faint smell of iron instead of smoke. I thought perhaps the oil had spoiled, so I poured more across the base of the altar. The liquid shivered as it touched the stone, rolling away from Father Lucien, as though the floor rejected the very idea of combustion. Brother Malchier opened the prayer book with trembling hands. The pages were damp, but not from water. They pulsed faintly beneath his thumbs, beating in time with my own heart. He tried to begin the litany of ash, but his voice cracked through the stitches of his lips, a soft wheeze of blood. His eyes met mine and said everything he couldn't. It won't work. He's not the one meant to burn. Father Lucien remained kneeling, calm as a statue. His mouth moved soundlessly, lips forming shapes that did not belong to any human language. The air around him shimmered. I stepped closer, blade drawn, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that frost formed across the iron. The metal sang, a low, angry vibration that crawled up my arm. The priest looked up at me, those milky eyes filled with something that might have been pity. "Do you still believe the fire serves you?" he asked. His voice was not one voice now. It was a choir, layered with grief and laughter, echoing off the walls like the memory of sermons long forgotten. "Tell me, Hunter, how many souls have you burned who begged to be cleansed? How many cried your name when the smoke took them?" I wanted to strike him then, to end his blasphemy, but my arm refused. The tendons in my wrist locked, frozen in place. The air itself had weight. It pressed down on my shoulders until my knees almost buckled. I could feel the heartbeat of the church beneath my boots, a slow, steady pulse like something ancient buried deep under the foundation. Malchier tried to light the pyre again. He used the last of the holy oil, splashing it across the circle of candles. The flames guttered once, twice, then erupted upward, not gold, but white, colorless as bone. For a moment I thought we had succeeded, but the light bent around Father Lucien, refusing to touch him. The fire spread instead to the walls, to the wooden pews, to the banners of saints long forgotten. The church burned without heat, a ghostly inferno that made no sound. Lucien began to laugh. It was not mockery. It was recognition. "You came to judge me," he said, "but your fire knows the truth. It will not burn what mirrors its own sin." I turned the blade toward him, the Latin words ignis non fallit glinting in the pale light. "Then let it test us both," I hissed, and drove the steel through his chest. The sound it made was not flesh being pierced, but stone cracking under pressure. The light in the church collapsed inward. The candles blew out all at once, plunging us into a darkness so thick it'd taste ash and copper. Lucien didn't fall. He simply looked down at the blade, and then back at me, as though disappointed. "Fire does not lie," he whispered, "but it can be deceived." The floor split open beneath the altar. Heat poured out, carrying the smell of rain on scorched soil. The glow from below illuminated carvings along the foundation, names, hundreds of them, etched into the stone like confessions. I recognized some. They were cleansers, men of my order, every one of them dead by flame. The names twisted as the heat rose, curling into new letters, until they spelled something else. My own name among them. Malchier screamed. It was the first sound he had made in years. His lips tore apart with the force of it, blood spraying across the altar. His body convulsed as if something crawled beneath his skin. I tried to reach him, but the air had turned solid, vibrating with the rhythm of that unseen heartbeat. Lucien began to rise, chains snapping one by one like brittle twigs. "You were never sent to purify me," he said. "You were sent to take my place." The flames obeyed him. They surged upward from the cracks, curling around his body like serpents. But they did not consume him. They crowned him. His skin blackened only to reveal light beneath. a furnace glow that pulsed through his veins. He was neither man nor demon now, but something in between. And when he looked at me, I understood why the fire had refused him. It was saving its hunger for me. I stumbled backward, tripping over the relic chest. The blade still burned faintly in my hand, but its Latin motto had changed. The letters rearranged themselves, glowing red-hot. Ignis non purgit, the fire does not cleanse. Malchir's body collapsed beside me, smoking. His stitched mouth hung open in a silent scream, and from within it came a thin stream of white fire that drifted toward Lucien, like a moth to its maker. The priest caught it in his palm and pressed it into his chest. "Another absolved," he said softly. Another flame returned to the source. I backed toward the doorway, desperate for air. The church trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling as the bell tower moaned above us. The ground burned cold under my boots, and I realized the frost spreading across the floor wasn't ice. It was ash crystallizing backward, reclaiming the heat it once gave. Lucien raised his hand toward me. "Don't fear it," he murmured. "You were chosen long before you were born. Every cleansing was just rehearsal." The air around me ignited. The fire climbed my cloak, my gloves, my skin. Yet I felt no pain. It crawled along my arms like water, tasting me, deciding. The voice that came from within the flame was not his, not mine, but something older. "You carry the spark," it said, "and sparks are meant to return home." I don't remember leaving the church. I only remember the feeling of being both burned and preserved, like a candle frozen mid-melt. When I woke outside, dawn was breaking. The steeple was gone, the marsh quiet. No body, no chains, no smoke. Only a circle of scorched earth that refused to cool, and at its center, the blade, buried upright in the soil, still glowing faintly with words I could no longer read. The fire had chosen, and I had no idea which side of the flame I now belonged to. I walked until the marsh traded water for frost, and frost for road. Daylight came pale and without temperature, a color more than a warmth. My cloak had burned without ash. The hem ended in a clean line, as if cut with the tailor's silver shears. Where the fabric should have frayed, there was instead a hard gloss, like cooled glass. When I touched it, I smelled apples and winter, and the first time I had ever lit a hearth alone. Memory was a resin, and it had set. I carried the blade because my hand would not unclench. The letters on its spine no longer settled. They drifted within the steel like fish beneath ice, sometimes forming words I recognized, sometimes not. At the edge of my hearing rode the bell of Calvarin, now ringing evenly, now falling silent mid-swing. I could not decide which was worse, the sound or the weight between. The monastery rose out of its own smoke like a city that doesn't know it is ruins. When the lay brothers saw me, they made the sign against lightning, the one meant to divert skyfire from barns. I smiled to calm them and felt my mouth move correctly, but their eyes tracked the air an inch to the side of my face, as if the heat there made me a mirage. It took a full minute for the porter to recognize me. He wept when he did, not from joy. He smelled of tallow and fear. They took me to the hall of the Inquisitors. The same 3 masks waited behind the same altar of black oak. The candles around them guttered and steadied, as if practicing how to behave. Sorrow, fury, silence. The elder's gloved hands trembled worse than before. "Report," he said, and it wasn't a question, but a ritual phrase, the latch you lift before a door opens. "Calvarin is empty," I answered. "Its steeple is gone. Father Lucien was alive when I reached him. He prayed with a patience that would shame a saint. The fire would not take him." "And you burned him anyway," the Inquisitor said, voice flat with hope. "I tried," I said, and the word echoed strange. The blade found stone where flesh should be. The floor opened and gave breath. Brother Malchir's vow broke and took him with it. The flames crowned Lucien like a priest wears chrism. They circled me. They measured me. They chose. Sorrow leaned forward. Fury shuddered as if laughing or choking. Silence tipped his mask a hair to the left, an angle I had only seen once, when a verdict surprised him. The elder's voice softened. "Which way did they choose?" "For me," I said. "Or through me?" I am unsure whether a door owns the room it opens into. Something in the hall sighed. Not wind. Relief's bad cousin. The Inquisitor raised both hands like a conductor ending a hymn. Then the ritual worked. He meant to say more. I didn't let him. No ritual of ours was running, I said, and this time my voice brought the smell of rain on hot stone into the room. Your order sent me to burn what the fire would not touch. The fire touched me instead. The fire does not lie, Silence said at last, as if pulling a nail out of his own tongue. And it doesn't choose by accident. We sent you because your records matched the pattern. Every time you lit a pyre, the smoke curled toward you first. Ignis non fallit, I answered, showing the blade. The motto refused to hold. The letters scattered, gathered, spelled my buried name, and then erased it. You taught me that the flame burns only what is condemned. That is the rule for novices, said Sorrow. There is an older rule for the ones we keep alive long enough to get good at it. Fire seeks itself. When it finds a body it can dwell in, it does not waste the opportunity. We have been listening for years, Brother Ashford. Bells change their note when their ringer changes. Calverin's bell found your hand the day you took vows. I wanted to be angry, but anger is a wet fuel. It smokes. What I felt then was a clean heat moving through my bones like a quiet lesson. So you sent me as kindling, I said, and if I did not take, you would have sent another, and another. Silence nodded, until it caught. The door behind me closed. I had not heard it open. Two acolytes stood there with their hoods drawn low. Their shadows leaned forward, eager, the way my candle flames had leaned away in the first meeting. They smelled of beeswax and fear. Between them, a small iron box, black wax, the sigil of the cleansers. Your blade, brother, the elder said gently. A father's voice rehearsed so well it almost was one. Set it on the altar. Kneel. This is the part where we cut the old name from your tongue and lay the new one in the wound. This is the part where you stop leaving footprints. The order has waited a long time for a spark that could survive its own test. My hand rose of its own accord and laid the blade across the wood. It lay there humming, not with threat, but with recognition, like a tuning fork discovering it is not alone. I knelt. The stone was colder than I remembered. When the acolytes opened the iron box, the smell that came out was not incense. It was winter apples and old walls that remember their own fires, and a bell that has been tied up for years suddenly allowed to swing free. The elder reached in and lifted a brand no longer than his palm, its tip dim as a spider's eye. He pressed it to my chest, and the hiss that sounded was my old name leaving. Light came through my shirt in a fine line, a neat seam, then bloomed into a shape I recognized before I saw it, the split cross of our seal. I had seen it that morning in the frost on the reeds, and years ago on the first pyre I lit alone, when the smoke traced that shape against a gray sky. The brand did not burn me. It informed me of something I had always been. When the elder removed it, my skin closed, leaving only a thin gloss, as if my body had learned glass. Stand, he said. Look at the candles. I did. They steadied, one by one. Each flame turned its face toward me as if to ask, well, and I answered what I had not known I could. I pushed my breath across the room without moving my lips. The flames bent to the right. I inhaled. They bent to the left. I spoke a syllable without sound. The air warmed. The room leaned away. Brother Malchier would have known how to read what came next. I only understand it now when I tell it. The smoke from those candles did not rise. It gathered around my ankles like affectionate cats. It curled against me as if trying to remember the shape of a chimney. I thought of Lucien, chains snapping like dry sticks, and of his laugh when the white fire crowned him. Crowns are heavy. He had carried his until I arrived. Father Lucien? I asked, because I needed to hear the answer from their mouths, not my memory. Released, the elder said, with a smile that did not touch the mask. Return to the source. He kept praying until the day we found him. He kept us safe from the choice, brother. You will do the same. What choice? I said, though I already knew. Fire kept 2 diaries, the list of things it had taken, and the list of things it wanted next, the choice to confess or consume. Silence said, when the bell rings and the smoke walks, men will bring you everything they want preserved as ash. You will decide which is truth and which is fuel. The church will call it purification. The towns will call it safety. We, and here his voice thinned, we will call it necessary. A truth as steady as a heartbeat rose from under the floor. I had felt it at Calvary and mistaken it for the church. It was not the church. It was the world's slow fire, humming through everything that remembers summer and winter. It waited for me to lean or to stand. I took up the blade. The letters calmed long enough to become a sentence I had never been taught. Keep the heat or set it free. I looked at the elder's mask. Sorrow. Right then I believed it. He had sent boys and men into pyres for decades, because there was never a good place to set a fire down. He needed a shelf. He had made me into one. Perhaps he even loved me for it. I did not rage. I did not preach. I did what fire does when it chooses. I reached for the nearest candle and pinched the flame out with my bare fingers. It did not hurt. I pressed that hot nub of nothing against the black wax seal of the iron box, and the wax surrendered in a perfect circle. I set the seal on the altar. It kept its shape like a coin. Brother, the elder said, and I heard the first honest fear in his voice, thin and silver as wire. Careful. I am, I said, for the first time. I lifted the brand from the box. It pulsed once in my hand, then went still, as if waiting to learn how it would be used. I touched it to the hem of my cloak. The fabric remembered glass and did not catch. I touched it to the old oak of the altar. The wood remembered oaths and did not catch. I touched it to the elder's brass mask. The metal remembered faces and did not catch. There is a gentleness to refusal when it is truth. I turned and pressed the brand to the floor where my knees had just been. The stone remembered every weight it had held, every pleading posture. It lit. No roar, no scream. The flame rose with the privacy of a confession. It climbed around the altar as a vine climbs a trellis, patient, choosing. It avoided the acolytes entirely. It skirted the elder's robe and picked out the thread that had been pulled tight at his hip the day his first son was born and then died at a week old, and it burned that thread and left the cloth. It found the old mildew under the lectern and made a clean lace of it. Where it passed, the air smelled like a house finally opened after a long winter. The elder sank to his knees. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "Showing it another way." I said, "It does not have to eat to be present." Silence tore off his mask. His face was younger than his hands. His eyes were old. "And if it asks for us?" "It will," I said. "Someday. Everything with a name goes on one of its lists. But not today." I walked between the flames, and they leaned away, courteous as monks in a cloister. When I reached the door, I turned back once. The hall looked warmer without looking harmed. The candles kept their shape. The masks on the wall no longer seemed to watch. The elder had his hands lifted in a prayer that had not been written yet. I left the monastery by the servants' path, under the lintel where we hang the snow shovels, past the well that sings in summer and coughs in winter. The sky had the color of unlit candles again. The wind had remembered itself. In the courtyard, I paused by the small bell we use to call men in from the fields when storm comes quick. I put my palm on the bronze and felt it notice me. "Not yet," I told it, "but soon." I went back to the marsh because endings belong where beginnings are buried. Calvary had not regrown a steeple. It had grown silence, the good kind, the kind that lets animals come back. A heron stood where the altar had cracked, knee-deep in black water, absolutely convinced that fish still existed. When I stepped into the nave, that wasn't. My boots did not sink. The ground remembered how to be floor. I found Brother Malchier's rattle under a peel of paint. The saints' faces sanded smooth. I shook it once. No sound. I set it on the old threshold, and the wind moved through its hollow and made a small voice like dawn. I pressed my hand flat to the place where the names had writhed in the heat. The stone was cool. The letters were gone. In their absence, I saw a space big enough to write a new rule. Fire does not lie. It will not cleanse what only time can, but it will listen if you speak to it without begging. I walked north along the water, where reeds make the music of small knives. The blade rode my hip like a sleeping animal. Every so often the letter stirred and formed a word for a place I had never seen. A mill that lost count of its own stones, a hospital where the oxygen hissed like snakes, a town whose church roof had learned to sweat salt. The world was aching. The world was ready. I am not a cleanser anymore. I am not an inquisitor. I am the bell ringer that walks, the one who does not need a tower. When the air warms wrong, I arrive. When candles turn their faces away from a room, I look where they are looking. Sometimes I teach the heat to be gentle. Sometimes I open my hand and let it choose. Sometimes I carry it on for a mile, so it can see there is more than the first thing it wants. Often I fail. Failure is a fuel too, and I am careful with it. If you come upon a circle of scorched earth that has daisies growing at the edges, as if they got only the warmth and not the pain, you will know I passed that way. If you find a church with its masks taken down and stacked like bowls for soup, you will know the elders learned something. If a bell rings in the marsh at noon, even when no rope is pulled, do not be afraid. It is only a door opening. It is only a fire remembering that it can be light. As for Father Lucien, I do not dream of him laughing anymore. Some nights, when the cold crawls thin over the floorboards and the stove holds its breath to see how I'll behave, I hear a man praying so slowly the words make a bridge to tomorrow. When I reach to add a stick, the flame leans toward my hand the way a child leans toward a story. I tell it one. It listens. It waits. And when it is time to choose, we choose together.